The night my husband kicked me out, he didn't raise his voice. That was the part that hurt the most. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms folded, watching me pack like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. No shouting, no explanations, just cold distance, like the decision had been made long before I ever knew there was a problem. "You need to go," he said, calmly. "Tonight." I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't catch up with the words. Go where? With what? I'd been a stay-at-home wife for 12 years. The bank accounts were in his name, the credit cards too, even my phone plan. "I didn't cheat," I said quickly, already defending myself against an accusation he hadn't made. "If this is about your sister, it's not a discussion. I've changed the passwords. You'll get your things later." That's when I noticed the small details. His phone face down on the dresser, the way his car keys were already in his pocket, the silence in the house, no TV, no radio, like he'd rehearsed this moment. I walked out with one suitcase and the kind of humiliation that sticks to your skin. By morning, reality set in. I slept in my car behind a grocery store, wrapped in a coat that still smelled like our closet. My phone buzzed once, bank alert. Transaction declined. Then again and again. Every account I tried, frozen. I called him, straight to voicemail. That's when I remembered the card. It was old, worn, beige, not even plastic like modern ones. My father's card. He'd given it to me years ago, pressing it into my palm like it was something fragile. "Just keep it," he'd said, "in case." In case of what? I never asked. My father had been a quiet man, too quiet, always tired, always between jobs. When he died, there was no inheritance, no savings, just debts and unanswered questions. I assumed the card was empty, sentimental at best. But desperation makes you brave in stupid ways. I drove to the nearest bank branch just to see, just to confirm there was nothing left to lose. The teller's smile vanished the second she typed in the number. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. I'm going to need a moment," she said, standing too quickly. "Please wait here." She didn't ask for ID. She didn't ask for my pen. She walked away and didn't come back. Instead, two men in dark suits approached, not uniforms, not police. Worse. "Ma'am, can you come with us?" My heart slammed so hard I tasted metal. Inside the private office, the air felt sealed. No windows, no signage. The older man sat across from me, studying my face like he was comparing it to a photograph in his head. "Where did you get this card?" he asked. "My father," I said. "He's dead." The room went very still. "That's complicated," he said slowly. Then he pressed a button under the desk. The door locked. And that's when I understood something terrifying. My husband didn't kick me out because I was worthless. He kicked me out because he knew exactly what I'd be forced to use. The locked door clicked softly behind me, and suddenly the office felt smaller. Too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. The older man didn't sit down right away. He stood near the wall, pretending to read something on a tablet, while the other man remained by the door. Neither of them touched the card. It lay on the desk between us like a loaded weapon. "You said your father is deceased?" the older man finally said. "Yes," I replied, 3 years ago." He nodded slowly, as if that answer had confirmed something he'd already suspected. He finally sat across from me, folding his hands. "This account isn't empty, it's restricted." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief flickered, then vanished just as quickly. "Restricted how?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the tablet toward me. I couldn't see numbers, just red warnings stacked on top of each other. "Do not disclose. Internal hold. Executive clearance required." "This card is linked to a legacy structure," he said carefully, "what we internally refer to as a shadow trust." I almost laughed. The words sounded ridiculous, like something from a crime show. My father worked night shifts and drove the same rusted car for 15 years. Shadow trust didn't belong in the same sentence as his name. "There must be a mistake," I said. "He barely had enough to pay rent." The man's eyes softened, not with pity, but with something closer to respect. That's what made it effective. Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened again. This time, a woman walked in. She was older than me, dressed impeccably, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. She looked at the card once, then at me. Then she said my father's name, not the one I knew. The sound of it made my stomach drop. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "That's not his name." Her gaze sharpened. It was one of them. One of them. I felt like the floor had shifted under my feet, just slightly, enough to throw off my balance. She sat down and tapped the tablet. "Your father established this trust over 30 years ago. It was designed to remain dormant unless accessed under specific conditions." "Like what?" I asked. She glanced at the men, then back at me. "Financial duress, marital displacement, loss of primary residence." My throat went dry. "This account didn't flag because you tried to withdraw money. It flagged because you met the activation criteria." The word activation echoed in my head. My father had planned this, not the details, but the moment. "So how much is in it?" I asked, hating myself for caring. All three of them went quiet. Finally, the woman spoke, enough that several institutions would prefer this account had never been touched. That's when fear replaced curiosity. I thought about my husband's calm voice, the way he'd already changed the passwords, the way he hadn't asked where I would go. He'd known I'd end up here. "My father was poor," I said, more to myself than to them. "He borrowed money from me." "Yes," the woman said gently, "and he paid it back anonymously, often within days." I stared at her. "He did what?" She tapped the screen again, and this time I saw patterns, deposits, transfers, small amounts routed through layers of accounts that looked like spider webs. "He never touched the principal," she said. "Not once. He lived off the edges of it." I felt something crack inside my chest. Why is everyone acting like this is dangerous? If it's legal, why the security? Why the locked door? The older man leaned forward now, because the trust isn't just money. I waited. "It's evidence," he said. The word landed heavy. "Evidence of what?" He hesitated, then said, "A financial structure that collapsed lives and governments, one that was never fully dismantled." The woman met my eyes. "Your father didn't steal from it, he survived it, and then he hid what remained so it couldn't be buried." My hands began to shake. "So why panic now?" I whispered. "Because your father was presumed dead twice, and this account proves he wasn't who the records say he was." The room felt suddenly airless. "And now," she added, "you've just announced to every system that watches this trust that the last living link to him is still here." I looked down at the card again. For the first time, I didn't see money. I saw a warning my father had left behind, and I finally understood something terrifying. This card wasn't meant to save me from being homeless. It was meant to protect the truth, no matter what the cost to the person who used it. I didn't go back to the car after the bank released me. I couldn't. The world outside those glass doors felt unreal, like a stage set for someone else's life. Instead, I sat on a bench across the street, staring at my hands, trying to reconcile the man they'd just described with the father I thought I knew. A stranger. That word followed me like a shadow. When I was 8, my father missed my birthday for the 3rd year in a row. My mother baked the cake herself, frosting it unevenly because she kept stopping to check the window. I remember pretending not to care, telling her I didn't want candles anyway. That night, long after the cake had gone stale, he came home smelling like rain and engine oil. He didn't explain. He never did. "I brought you something," he said quietly, setting a book on my nightstand. No wrapping, no card. I'd learned early that questions made him disappear longer. As I sat there now, the memory twisted into something sharper. Had he been late or hiding? There were phone calls, too, always at odd hours. He'd answer in the hallway, his voice low, clipped, nothing like the soft tone he used with me. Sometimes he spoke in fragments that didn't make sense, numbers, street names, words that felt out of place in our small apartment. If I walked too close, he'd stop talking. "Go to bed," he'd say gently, covering the receiver with his hand. "This isn't for you." I thought it meant I didn't matter. That belief shaped everything. When he forgot to pick me up from school, I told myself I wasn't important enough to remember. When he missed my graduation because of work, I smiled through the ceremony and told my friends he was sick. I became good at minimizing my own disappointment, shrinking it so it wouldn't take up too much space. But now, the banker's words replayed in my head. He lived off the edges of it. He never touched the principal. He hid what remained so it couldn't be buried. I thought about the way he paid bills in cash, the way he never kept documents in one place, the shoeboxes under the bed filled with papers he'd burn a few at a time in the sink when he thought I wasn't watching. Once, when I was 15, I asked him why he never took pictures. Photos last too long, he said without looking at me. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. Now I wondered if he meant legally. There was the night the power went out and we ate dinner by candlelight. I joked that it felt like we were hiding. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear, raw and unguarded. "Never joke about that," he said. I laughed it off, embarrassed. I wasn't laughing now. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and felt the hard edge of the card through the fabric of my bag. It felt heavier than it had that morning, like it had absorbed the weight of everything I was starting to understand. My father hadn't been absent because he didn't care. He'd been absent because being present was dangerous. That realization hurt more than the old version ever had. It meant all those years of distance weren't neglect, they were restraint, a choice, one that kept me alive without ever letting me know I was at risk. I remembered the rules he'd enforced without explanation. Never share our address, never talk about family to strangers. If someone asks about me, say I work nights. If someone asks about him, say he's traveling. "Why?" I asked once. "Because the truth is heavier than lies, and some people get crushed by it," he replied. I thought he was being poetic. I was wrong. The worst memory came back all at once, the day he gave me the card. He was already sick then, thinner than he should have been, his hands trembling slightly as he pressed it into my palm. "Keep this," he said. "Don't use it unless you have no other choice." "What is it?" I asked. "A door, one I hope you never open." I rolled my eyes and tucked it into a drawer, convinced it was another one of his strange, overdramatic habits. Now I understood the cost of that door. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have gone to the bank." My breath caught. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, the past and present finally snapping into alignment. My father hadn't been running from responsibility. He'd been standing between me and something that never stopped looking. And now that he was gone, it had found me. I didn't reply to the message. My fingers hovered over the screen, every instinct screaming to ask, "Who are you?" But my father's voice echoed in my head, calm and firm. "The truth is heavier than lies." I slid the phone back into my pocket and stood, suddenly aware of how exposed I was sitting out in the open. The bank had given me a number to call, a direct line that came with instructions I hadn't expected. "Do not return to your residence," the woman had said. "Do not use public Wi-Fi. And if anyone contacts you about the account, do not engage." I walked 2 blocks before calling. The line connected immediately, as if someone had been waiting. "Miss Carter," the same woman said, "I was hoping you'd reach out." "I got a message," I said. "Someone knows." There was a pause, not surprise, but confirmation. "Yes," she said. "That's why we need to tell you everything, now." She directed me to a private conference space, not the branch I'd just left, a different building, no signage. When I arrived, security didn't ask my name, they already had it. Inside, the truth came apart slowly, like a body being identified piece by piece. Your father, they told me, had lived under at least 3 names. The one I knew was the quietest of them. The name he buried, the one that triggered the internal panic, was tied to a financial fraud case so large it had never fully gone to trial. Not because it lacked evidence, but because too many powerful people were implicated. The investigation had stalled, then dissolved, then quietly disappeared from public record. But not from private ones. Your father wasn't charged, the woman said. He cooperated. Cooperated. That single word rewrote decades of assumptions. He hadn't been a criminal. He'd been a witness. The trust had been created in the fallout, money seized, reallocated, hidden from the very system that had allowed the fraud to thrive. Officially, the funds were frozen pending litigation that never came. Unofficially, they were forgotten on purpose. "Until now," I whispered. "Yes," she said. The trust had been locked for over 30 years, its existence known only to a small circle of institutions bound by legal threats I couldn't pronounce. Every few years, the system checked for signs of life, activity, inquiries, claims. There were none, because my father made sure there wouldn't be. He never touched the core, never tried to reclaim what wasn't his. He lived like a man with nothing because acting like a man with something would have drawn attention. And when he died? I asked. The woman hesitated. That's where things become complicated. My father hadn't filed a standard death declaration. Of course he hadn't. The alias tied to the trust had been marked presumed deceased after a foreign hospital reported a fatal accident involving a man matching his description. Dental records, fingerprints, all convincing. All false. He staged his own death, I said, my voice barely steady. He completed a contingency, she corrected gently. The trust was designed to transfer only under specific conditions, verified death of the primary holder, and demonstrable risk to the successor, me. My name appeared in the documents not as a beneficiary, but as a continuity holder, a legal bridge. Your father didn't want you to have the money, the woman said. He wanted you to have the leverage. The room felt cold. The moment I used the card, the system flagged something it hadn't seen before, a living successor activating a trust tied to a case that was never supposed to be reopened. That's why security responded, not to you, but to the risk. What risk? I asked. She met my eyes. That an investigation starts again. Banks don't fear poverty, they fear history. If this trust reawakened, dormant subpoenas could follow, names long erased could resurface, institutions that had survived by forgetting would be forced to remember. And you're connected to all of it, she added. I thought about my husband, the way he'd watched me pack, the way he'd already known the accounts would fail. He knew, I said quietly. Yes, she said. He accessed restricted databases through an intermediary. That's how he found the trust. So he kicked me out to force my hand, to make me activate it. Exactly. The woman leaned forward. But here's what he didn't understand. I waited. Once activated, she said, the trust doesn't answer to anyone except its successor. My pulse roared in my ears, which is you. I should have felt powerful. Instead, I felt hunted. Because the bank wasn't protecting me, they were protecting themselves from what my father had buried and from what would happen if I decided to dig it up. And judging by the message on my phone, I wasn't the only one who knew that name was alive again. I didn't want to believe it. Even after everything the bank had told me, even after the message on my phone and the weight of my father's secrets pressing down on my chest, there was still a part of me clinging to the idea that my husband had simply panicked, that he'd made a cruel decision out of fear, not calculation. That hope lasted until I opened my email. Buried deep in the spam folder was a forwarded message I didn't recognize. No subject line, just an attachment and a single sentence. You should see what he's been digging into. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened the attachment and felt my stomach drop. It was a report, not official looking, but thorough. Dates, cross-references, archived court filings pulled from databases I didn't even know existed. My father's buried name appeared again and again, linked to shell companies, asset freezes, and sealed testimonies. At the bottom of the document was a name I did recognize. My husband's. Not as an author, but as a requester. He'd been researching my father for years. I scrolled, my hands shaking. The earliest inquiry was dated 3 months before he proposed to me. I remembered that night clearly, the way he'd seemed nervous, the way he'd insisted on a small ceremony, no guest list, no paper trail beyond what was legally required. I thought it was romantic. It was efficient. The report detailed how he used a consulting firm, one with deep ties to financial investigations, to probe dormant trusts linked to unresolved cases. My father's alias was marked High Value Dormant. High value. I felt sick. He hadn't married me despite my background. He'd married me because of it. Memory after memory twisted into something ugly. The way he'd asked questions about my childhood under the guise of curiosity, the way he'd casually brought up my father's odd jobs, my mother's finances, the timing of my father's death. "How long after the funeral did the house get cleared out?" he'd asked once. I'd answered without thinking. He'd been collecting pieces. The document ended with a chilling note. "Contingency plan required. Subject may activate trust under stress conditions." Stress conditions. My eviction. The room felt like it was spinning. I leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, laptop balanced uselessly on my knees. Our entire marriage replayed itself through this new lens. The arguments that never went anywhere, the way he discouraged me from working, how he insisted on controlling the finances to simplify things. The way he smiled when I talked about my father, always asking just one question too many. He hadn't loved me. He'd studied me. I thought about the night he kicked me out, the calm in his voice, the preparation. He'd known exactly how long it would take before I reached for that card. He'd known desperation would override caution. He was counting on it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was him. "You okay? We should talk." The audacity of it stole my breath. I didn't reply. Minutes later, another message. "The bank stuff is complicated. I can explain." Explain, as if there was an explanation big enough to contain this betrayal. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I let myself grieve, not just the marriage, but the version of my life I'd believed in, the safety I thought I'd earned. All of it was strategy. I thought of my father again, the distance, the secrets, the way he'd lived 2 lives to protect me from something I'd married into willingly. The irony burned. Another message appeared, longer this time. "You don't understand what you're holding. People are going to come after you. Let me help. We can do this together. Like we planned." Like we planned. My hands clenched into fists. There it was. Confirmation. I typed one sentence before I could stop myself. "You planned this." The reply came almost instantly. "We planned for us to be safe." I laughed out loud, the sound sharp and ugly in the empty room. Safe? From what? From the truth? From consequences? I realized then that kicking me out hadn't been the betrayal. Marrying me had. He hadn't broken my heart in a moment of cruelty. He'd built our entire life on a lie and waited patiently for the day I'd unlock my father's secrets for him. But he'd miscalculated one thing. I wasn't the scared, dependent woman he designed me to be. I was my father's successor. And whatever he thought this trust was worth, he was about to learn how expensive betrayal could be. The first threat didn't sound like a threat. It arrived wrapped in concern, dressed up as advice, and delivered by someone who claimed to be on my side. I was halfway through a lukewarm coffee in the small apartment the bank had arranged, temporary, anonymous, paid for under a name I wasn't allowed to know, when my phone rang. No caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. The message was calm, almost kind. "Miss Carter," a man's voice said, "you don't know me, but I know enough about your situation to suggest you walk away. Close the account, decline succession, go back to your life while you still can." Still can. I replayed the message twice, my pulse climbing higher each time. He didn't mention money. He didn't threaten me outright. That made it worse. I forwarded the voicemail to the bank contact immediately. Her response came an hour later. "We anticipated this. Please don't engage. Also, there are forms we should discuss." Forms. By the time I arrived at the office, they were waiting with a folder already open on the table. Not a demand, not an order, an option. "If you choose to relinquish succession," the woman said carefully, "the trust will return to dormant status, the flags will resolve, attention will dissipate." "And if I don't?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she slid the folder toward me. Inside were documents outlining what she called a voluntary closure pathway. Legal language so dense it felt designed to exhaust rather than inform. "You'd be compensated," she said, "a settlement, enough to start over." There it was. The bank wasn't afraid of me having money. They were afraid of me having leverage. You want me to disappear, I said quietly. She met my eyes. We want this to stop. I thought about the voicemail, about the way the man had said, while you still can. This isn't just about finances anymore, is it? I asked. The silence was answer enough. She sighed. Once certain systems wake up, they don't go back to sleep easily. People get nervous, mistakes get made. People like my husband, I said. Yes, and people far more insulated. The room felt heavier than before, like the walls themselves were listening. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. My father built this trust to protect the truth, and now you're asking me to bury it again. We're asking you to survive, she said softly. That word hit harder than any threat. Survive, as if choosing truth was a form of suicide. I stood up. I need time. She nodded. Of course, but understand this. Every day this remains active, the risk increases for everyone, including me. That night, the messages started. Different numbers, similar tone. This isn't worth it. Your father already paid the price. Some doors shouldn't be reopened. One message stood out. You think this is about justice. It's about containment. Choose wisely. I locked my phone and pressed it face down on the table, my hands trembling. Containment. They weren't warning me about danger. They were warning me about disruption. I paced the apartment, replaying everything my father had done, every sacrifice, every absence. He'd lived small so something big couldn't be erased. And now everyone wanted me to make the same choice? Disappear quietly? Let the system stay intact? Let my husband walk away untouched? The thought made my chest burn. Late that night, I found something I hadn't noticed before in the folder the bank had given me, a handwritten note tucked between the pages, written in a careful, familiar script. My father's. If they ask you to walk away, it means you're standing in the right place. I sat down hard, tears blurring the words. This was bigger than money, bigger than my marriage, even bigger than my father's reputation. This was about whether the truth he'd protected would die with him or finally breathe. And judging by the fear in everyone's voices, they were terrified I'd choose the second option. Sleep stopped coming after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's handwriting, steady and deliberate, as if he'd known exactly when I would read it. If they ask you to walk away, it means you're standing in the right place. I brought the note with me to the next meeting. This time, the woman didn't pretend we were discussing options. The folder on the table was different, thinner, marked with internal labels I wasn't meant to see. She waited until the door was sealed before she spoke. You deserve to understand what your father actually did, she said. The word actually made my stomach tighten. She didn't start with money. She started with names, dozens of them. Companies, governments, pension funds, charities, entities that had collapsed overnight decades ago, leaving ordinary people ruined, retirements erased, hospitals defunded, small towns hollowed out. The fraud wasn't just financial, she said. It was systemic. I listened as she explained how the scheme worked, not like a single heist, but like a machine. Assets were siphoned upward through layers of legality so dense they were nearly invisible. When it finally imploded, the damage scattered outward, and the people responsible vanished behind contracts and immunity agreements. Your father was inside that system, she said. Not at the top, never the beneficiary, but close enough to see the whole shape of it. He'd been hired for his precision, his ability to disappear into processes no one bothered to examine. He wasn't supposed to question anything. But he did. When the investigation began, he didn't get dragged in. He walked in. She said he brought documentation, not copies, originals. Evidence the architects assumed no one could ever assemble. What shocked me most wasn't that he testified. It was what happened afterward. The money that formed the core of the trust wasn't stolen. It was rescued. During the collapse, certain assets had nowhere to go. Courts froze them, governments argued over jurisdiction, and in the confusion they were abandoned, not returned to victims, not claimed by the state, left to rot. My father moved them, legally but quietly, into a structure designed not to enrich him, but to preserve a record. Every dollar was tagged, traceable, tied to a paper trail that led back to the damage it represented. The trust is a ledger, the woman said, not a fortune. A ledger. That word made something inside me settle. I said, "He could have cashed out, disappeared." "Yes," she said, "many did. But he didn't. No, because if he had, the evidence would have scattered, dissolved into the very system it was meant to expose. So he hid it, not to hoard, but to wait." She continued, "He knew the truth wasn't survivable at the time. Too many people would have been crushed by the backlash, including you." I thought about the life he'd chosen, the small apartment, the worn shoes, the way he counted every expense. He'd been guarding a mountain while living like there was nothing to see. "The trust was never meant to be opened casually," the woman said. "It was designed to outlive him." I swallowed hard. "Then why me?" She paused. "Because you weren't part of the system," she said. "You're clean, uncompromised." I almost laughed at that. My husband had married me for leverage. The bank wanted me to disappear. Strangers were warning me to walk away. Clean didn't feel like the right word. But I understood what she meant. I hadn't benefited. I hadn't colluded. I'd lived honestly, even when it cost me. My father had made sure of that. He didn't protect criminals. He protected victims, and he protected the possibility that one day someone could prove what really happened. That someone was never supposed to be me. But life doesn't ask permission before handing you a burden. I thought about the victims she'd listed, the pensions, the hospitals, the towns, people who'd never known why everything vanished, only that it had. And I thought about my husband, circling this trust like a vulture, seeing only numbers and opportunity. He hadn't understood it at all. The trust wasn't power, it was accountability, and that's why everyone was afraid of it. As I left the meeting, my phone buzzed again. A new message. "Last chance, close it, or you'll lose more than your marriage." I didn't reply. For the first time since my father died, I felt close to him, not as the distant man I'd resented, but as the one who'd carried this alone for decades. He hadn't been waiting for wealth to be claimed. He'd been waiting for the right moment for the truth to survive. And whether I was ready or not, that moment had arrived. The envelope was small, yellowed, fragile, and tucked behind a false panel in the bottom drawer of the sideboard my father had left behind. I hadn't looked for it. I didn't know I was meant to, and yet here it was, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, me, desperate, betrayed, standing on the edge of a life I barely recognized. I hesitated. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's, tight and precise. No flourishes, no warmth, just a line of ink that seemed to hold the weight of decades. Inside, folded perfectly, was a letter, and beneath it a small digital recorder, old and scratched. I picked it up cautiously, wondering if it was some kind of instruction manual or a final warning. I pressed play. His voice, unmistakable even through static, filled the empty apartment. "By the time you hear this," he began, "I will be gone, gone from the world you know, but never from the work I left behind. If you are reading this, it means my trust has been activated, or will soon be." A shiver ran down my spine. He had anticipated everything. "I know your husband," the recording continued. "I know what he is capable of, what he believes he deserves. If he has gone to the lengths of controlling your access to money, to manipulating your decisions, then you must assume he will not stop with persuasion or threats." I gripped the recorder tighter. Every word was measured, deliberate, every pause intentional. "The card I gave you," he said, "is not an ordinary key. It was meant to activate only under duress, only when all other options have failed, when you have no choice but to reclaim what is yours and what is necessary to preserve the truth." I swallowed hard. That single sentence rewrote everything I thought I knew about him, about my father, about the card I had dismissed as sentimental years ago. It wasn't money. It wasn't an inheritance. It was strategy, a shield, a weapon, a test. "You may question my absence, my silence," he said, his voice softening, though there was still steel beneath it. "I know you remember nights I was gone, birthdays I missed, phone calls that ended abruptly. Do not see those as neglect. They were protection. Every absence was a line of defense, every secret a safeguard." My chest tightened. Memories I had resented for years, the lonely birthday dinners, the missed recitals, the unexplained errands he had to run, suddenly felt different. They were calculated, purposeful, protective. I anticipate your husband, the recording continued, will attempt to claim leverage. He will misread the trust as wealth alone. He will underestimate the evidence, the strategy, and the purpose embedded in what I have left. He will not understand, and that is his mistake. I pressed pause for a moment, trying to breathe. The words were so precise, so coldly logical, it was almost impossible to digest. My father had planned not only for my life, but for my husband's miscalculations, for his own death, for the exact day I would need to use the card. Do not confront him directly, the recording warned. Do not attempt to negotiate. Stand firm. The card is your proof, your safeguard, and your authority. Those who built the system I exposed will test you. They will try to intimidate, manipulate, or bargain. Hold steady. Your actions must reflect the legacy, not emotion. I felt tears prick my eyes, but not sadness, awe, reverence, fear. The lever in my hand and the voice in my ears were not just guidance, they were the culmination of a life lived in shadows for a purpose I had only begun to understand. He continued, almost as if speaking to the child I had once been. You are capable of more than you know. Trust your instincts, use what I have left wisely, and remember, my greatest failure would have been leaving you unprepared. This card, the trust, the records, all are yours because I could not face the world without ensuring you could survive it. I sat back, the recorder trembling slightly in my hand. For the first time in years, I felt the enormity of my father's foresight. Every absence, every omission, every silent sacrifice, it had all been a layer of armor, a series of contingencies designed for one purpose. Me, standing here, ready to inherit not just money, but the power to expose the truth. I opened the letter. Inside were instructions, written in short, clipped sentences. How to verify the card, how to activate the trust, how to contact specific people without leaving digital traces. Every step accounted for risk. Every instruction anticipated interference from my husband, the bank, or others who might try to suppress what he had built. I pressed play again, listening to the final words. Remember, the card is not a tool for revenge. It is a key to accountability. Only activate it when the threat is real, and never underestimate the lengths those who fear truth will go to protect themselves. Your father is gone, but the truth must survive. That is your inheritance. I sat in silence long after the recording ended, the weight of his plan settling over me. The card in my bag suddenly felt heavier than ever, not because of money, but because of responsibility. And for the first time, I understood fully. Everything my husband had done, every subtle manipulation, every cold smile, it had been anticipated. He hadn't just left me out in the cold, he had left me standing in the storm my father had prepared me to weather. And now, there was no turning back. The first notice arrived by courier. Not email, not a call, a thick envelope hand-delivered to the temporary apartment, my name typed carefully on the front like someone wanted proof they'd found me. Inside was a legal filing. My husband was claiming spousal entitlement to the trust. I stared at the pages, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. I'd expected anger, maybe panic. Instead, there was a strange calm, like watching a storm finally reach the place it had been building toward all along. He'd filed under emergency conditions, citing marital assets, abandonment, and imminent financial harm. The language was aggressive, urgent, desperate. He wasn't asking anymore. He was trying to take. I called the number my father had written in the margin of his letter, the one he'd underlined twice. The line rang once. Then, "We've been waiting for this." Within hours, everything accelerated. The bank's tone changed first. Gone was the careful suggestion that I walk away. Gone were the folders labeled options. In their place came procedures, confirmations, and something close to resignation. "She's triggered the containment clauses," the woman told me over a secure line, "which means the trust has responded." "Responded how?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, defensively. I learned later what that meant. The trust wasn't passive. It had never been designed to simply hold assets. It was reactive, wired to identify hostile claims, conflicts of interest, and bad faith actors. My husband's filing had done more than announce his intentions. It had exposed him. Because in order to claim the trust, he'd had to disclose his own financial structures, accounts, partnerships, shell companies he'd never mentioned to me, all stacked neatly behind the image of the careful, responsible husband. The trust cross-referenced everything, automatically. He didn't know that by asserting control, he was consenting to review. I thought of my father's voice. He will underestimate the purpose. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was my husband. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "What did you do?" he demanded, the calm gone, replaced by something sharp and frantic. "I didn't do anything," I said honestly. "You did. You froze my accounts, every single one, my business lines, my investments, everything is locked." I closed my eyes. The trap hadn't snapped shut violently. It had closed cleanly. "I didn't freeze anything," I said. "You activated the trust." Silence on the other end, then quieter. "That's not possible." I pictured him now, pacing, phone pressed to his ear, the world slipping from under him the way mine had days earlier. "You thought it was just money. You thought you could force me to open it and step aside. You had no right," he started. "No, you had no right." I heard his breathing change, faster, shallower. "They're calling me," he said. "Banks, partners, people I've worked with for years. They're asking questions." Of course they were. The trust didn't accuse. It revealed. By attempting to seize it, he'd put a spotlight on himself and everything he carefully kept in shadow. "You set me up," he said finally. I almost laughed. "No," I said. "You walked into something you didn't understand." He hung up. By evening, the formal notice arrived. Counter-containment protocol activated. In plain terms, it meant this: any individual attempting to assert control over the trust without proper authority would have their assets temporarily frozen pending investigation. Temporary in theory, devastating in practice. My husband had spent years positioning himself as untouchable. Advisors, legal buffers, diversified holdings, all of it designed to make him immune to scrutiny. And now, because he'd grown impatient, because he'd underestimated my father, every layer was being peeled back at once. I sat on the edge of the bed as the implications settled in. He'd kicked me out to force my hand. I'd played my part without knowing it, and in doing so, I'd triggered a mechanism that didn't care about marriage, manipulation, or excuses. Only intent. That night, I received one last message from an unknown number. This wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't respond, because for the first time since this began, I understood something clearly. My father hadn't built the trust to destroy people. He'd built it to expose them when they tried to take what wasn't theirs. And my husband, he'd just proved exactly why it existed. The morning of the hearing, I woke with a weight on my chest I couldn't shake. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was anticipation. I had spent weeks navigating the labyrinth my father had left behind, tracing instructions, listening to recordings, following cryptic notes, and every step had led here, to the courthouse steps, to a room that would finally expose decades of hidden truths. I arrived early, dressed simply, blending in. Cameras weren't allowed inside the main courtroom, but journalists had already begun to cluster outside, murmuring speculation. My name hadn't been released, but my father's had, cautiously, through official filings. The press called it the Shadow Trust Case, a decades-old financial mystery finally reopening. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Lawyers moved papers, whispered to clients, checked phones. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and anxiety. I took a seat near the back, clutching the recorder my father had left, the envelope with his final instructions tucked under my arm. When my husband entered, I felt a cold ripple. He carried the same arrogance I had once mistaken for charm, but now it was replaced with something more desperate, fear, thinly disguised. His lawyers flanked him, briefcases full of arguments that no longer mattered. The judge entered, and the room quieted. "We are here to address the claims regarding the trust formerly held under Mr. Daniels," he began. I felt the familiar chill run down my spine. My father's alias was finally spoken aloud in the place it had been buried for decades. The prosecution outlined the original fraud network: shell companies, hidden accounts, embezzled funds. They described the collapse and the devastation it caused: pensions wiped out, hospitals underfunded, communities ruined. My father's name appeared repeatedly, but this time in a different light. He was not accused, he was vindicated. The documents, meticulously preserved in the trust, proved he had acted to save assets, protect victims, and gather evidence against the perpetrators. When my father's voice from the recorder played, the courtroom fell silent. "I lived in shadows to protect the truth," it said. "If this reaches my successor, it is because the world must know what was hidden." I felt a lump in my throat. The same man who had seemed absent, distant, and cold for so many years had left a legacy of justice that even the most powerful couldn't ignore. Then came the moment I had feared and anticipated. My husband's attorneys tried to step forward, asserting his marital claim. They argued, in precise legal language, that he had entitlement to the trust as a spousal partner, citing documents he had submitted to the court. The room waited for me to respond. I stood slowly, taking the recorder from my bag and placing it on the bench in front of the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline, "my father anticipated every attempt to misuse this trust. It is not marital property. It is a safeguard for victims, and any attempt to claim it outside of the successor's authority triggers protective clauses." The judge nodded, reviewing the documents I presented, including correspondence, the trust instructions, and the evidence my father had preserved. Each paper reinforced what I had learned in fragments over weeks. The trust was not a prize, it was a shield. The courtroom gasped softly as the enforcement officer explained the activation. My husband's assets, his accounts, his investment portfolios, all temporarily frozen pending further review, were directly tied to his attempt to seize the trust. His network, built on secrecy and assumption, was unraveling. I looked at him, watching the color drain from his face. The confidence he had relied upon for years was gone. Every strategy he had used to control me and the trust backfired spectacularly. The judge cleared my father's name, formally stating that he had acted in good faith, protecting evidence and victims alike. My father was no longer the absent, ineffectual man I had resented as a child. He was a protector, a strategist, and a man who had lived with silence as his armor to shield others. Finally, the court addressed my husband. His claim was dismissed in full, and the judge noted that his attempt to gain access constituted a breach of fiduciary protocol. While criminal implications were under investigation, the public record now listed him as a potential co-conspirator, legally implicated, exposed for attempting to manipulate and misuse the trust. I sat back, finally allowing myself to breathe. Relief and vindication washed over me, but there was no joy in cruelty. My father had never built this for revenge. He had built it for truth, and now the truth had prevailed. As the courtroom cleared, I stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. Reporters shouted questions, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of my father's foresight, the magnitude of his sacrifice, was enough. For the first time in my life, I understood him. Not just as the father who had been distant and the man who had quietly prepared me to face the world on my own terms, to navigate danger, and to carry his legacy without fear. The hearing had ended, the network of lies had been exposed, my father's name was cleared, and my husband? He had learned, far too late, that the game had always been designed without him in mind. I folded the recorder back into my bag, the letter resting on top, and walked out into the sunlight. The storm my father had prepared me for had arrived, and I had weathered it. But more than that, I had survived. The courthouse steps felt different that evening. Quiet, empty, almost reverent. People had gone, the cameras packed up, and the echo of my father's vindication lingered in the air like a faint scent of old paper and smoke. I should have felt relief, triumph, even excitement. But instead, I felt hollow. Wealth had a strange way of landing on you. One moment, it's theoretical, numbers and spreadsheets, promises of accounts and assets. The next, it's real, tangible, yet somehow intangible. I had access to money my father had safeguarded for decades, yet every dollar felt like a reminder of what I had lost, not what I had gained. I walked back to the apartment, hands in pockets, replaying every memory of my father. His absences, once sharp and bitter, now carried a weight of purpose I hadn't understood. Birthdays he missed, late-night phone calls cut short, the mysterious envelopes. Every moment was a calculated act of protection. I realized I had spent my life resenting a man who had been quietly carrying a mountain of responsibility on my behalf. The wealth I now possessed couldn't buy back those years. It couldn't rewrite the mornings I woke to an empty kitchen, wondering why he wasn't there. It couldn't replace the guidance hidden in his silences or the love embedded in his distant care. Money had arrived, but the void it came with remained untouched. I went to the small study my father had left behind. The walls were lined with books, papers, and folders, organized chaos only he could navigate. I ran my fingers over the spines, remembering how he had carefully cataloged everything, leaving breadcrumbs for someone like me, someone he trusted to carry the truth forward. I found the envelope again, the one with his final letter and the recorder. I held it close, listening once more to his voice. The card is not a tool for revenge. It is a key to accountability. His words echoed in the empty room, a reminder that the power I now held was not about wealth, but responsibility. I thought about my husband, now legally exposed, financially restrained, powerless against the mechanisms my father had prepared. Part of me felt satisfaction, but it was fleeting. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted closure. Sitting in that quiet study, I realized closure wasn't about justice or money. It wasn't about seeing my father's plans succeed or my husband fail. It was about reconciliation with the truth, accepting the man he had been, the sacrifices he had made, and the life he had left for me to inherit. I placed the card back in its envelope, feeling the weight of it, not as currency, but as history, as proof, as legacy. My father's life, once opaque and frustrating, had revealed itself to me, fully, and in that revelation, grief and gratitude intertwined. I walked to the window and looked out over the city, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and crimson. It reminded me of him, strong, silent, unyielding, a man who had carried unseen burdens so that I could stand in truth without fear. Tears came, unbidden, and I let them fall, not for money, not for revenge, not for the lost years, but for him, for the father I had misunderstood, for the lessons he had imparted without speaking, for the quiet courage that had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. I knew then that the legacy wasn't the wealth, it was the clarity, the foresight, and the strength he had passed to me. Money could fix some things, perhaps, but it could never fix grief. It could never replace guidance. It could never explain the absence of a father to a child who needed him. And yet, in understanding, I found a kind of peace. I folded the letter, turned off the recorder, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to sit with my father's memory, not angry, not resentful, not confused, but simply grateful. Money hadn't healed me. My father had. And somehow, that was enough. The morning air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of rain and concrete, as if the city itself had exhaled after the storm. I stepped outside, keys in hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. Not the control of wealth or of legal victories or even of vindication, but control over my own life. For the first time since my father's secrets had been revealed, I could make decisions that were truly mine. I wasn't reacting to manipulation or fear. I wasn't stepping into a trap or walking a path someone else had laid out. I was opening a door on my own terms. I thought about the trust, the card, the recordings, the folders, the letters. Every step had brought me here, but this wasn't about using the tools my father left behind to punish anyone. Justice had been served, my husband's schemes exposed, his assets frozen, his influence dismantled. That was enough. I chose not revenge. I chose justice, not the kind meted out in courts or in headlines, but the kind that aligns with integrity, with truth, and with respect for what my father had truly fought for. The ledger of evidence wasn't a weapon to destroy people. It was a safeguard for the innocent, a shield for those who had been wronged by a system too large and too careless to notice them. I walked through the small apartment I had claimed, the temporary space that had once felt isolating and now felt like a blank canvas. I placed my father's letter and the recorder carefully on the desk, knowing I didn't need them anymore. Not for guidance, not for proof. I understood the lessons he had left behind. I carried them with me. Memories came unbidden, childhood birthdays spent alone, the nights he disappeared, the quiet dinners, the cryptic notes. Once I had felt abandoned, once I had felt unloved, but standing here, breathing the cool air of a life reclaimed, I understood. I had never been abandoned. I had been protected. Every absence, every silence, every odd behavior had been a line of defense, a layer of strategy to shield me from dangers I couldn't even see. My father had walked unseen, fought unseen battles, and built unseen structures so that one day I could stand upright, unbroken in the truth. Tears prickled my eyes, not grief this time, but gratitude, the kind that fills the chest and loosens the shoulders, the kind that whispers that the person who shaped you, even from a distance, did so out of love. I opened my laptop, looking over the plans I had drafted for my own life. Small business ventures, volunteering for organizations that had been victims of financial manipulation, mentorship programs for young women navigating challenges I had once thought insurmountable. Every choice felt intentional, every action a reflection of the values my father had instilled without ever saying them outright. I wasn't just inheriting wealth, I was inheriting responsibility, purpose, vision. I thought of my husband one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. He had played a role in my story, but his chapter had ended. He was a lesson, not a legacy. The trust, my father's card, the letters, all had been designed to prepare me for moments like this, and I had arrived. I had walked through the door he had kept closed for decades, and now I was stepping into a world of my own making. As the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the streets, I felt a quiet joy, not the loud, fleeting thrill of victory, but the steady, enduring warmth of truth realized and embraced. I paused at the window, gazing out at the city, and whispered into the quiet morning, "Thank you, Dad." The door he had kept closed for so long had finally opened, and I stepped through it, not because I had no fear, not because life was simple or safe, but because I finally understood what it meant to be protected, not abandoned. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. The storm had passed, the shadows had lifted, and the legacy my father had built in silence and in sacrifice would live, not as a secret, not as wealth, but as a testament to love, foresight, and unwavering protection. I turned from the window, the city alive beneath me, and walked forward. My life finally was my own.